Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing a little bit of a deck declutter. This is probably a new series that I'm going to be starting on my channel and doing here and there as I kind of go through my deck collection. I'm trying to just kind of spend some time taking a look at where maybe I have some repeating energies in my collection and some decks that maybe just aren't really getting any use in my collection and maybe need to find their way to a new home. So as I've been collecting decks and going through the process, I've kind of noticed that there are some decks that kind of come in and then take the place of other decks. And I do end up just usually putting the decks aside that aren't getting as much love for a while, just to see if I kind of want to pull them back in at some point. And if I don't, that's usually really telling. So a lot of these decks have kind of been in a loose sort of purgatory, if not in a purgatory box for quite some time. And I thought maybe it was just time to start slowly going through it. So we're gonna start this off with like two decks that I'm pretty sure I know how this is gonna go. So we're gonna do this like a little Lisa Pepez style, little this or that. Like I have this, do I need that type of a thing? Because I love that. And I definitely feel like there's some decks in my collection that are sitting in a very similar place. And I do tend to prefer one over the other, I think. And that's what the point of this video is going to be. So our first like this or that we're gonna kind of like go head to head. We're gonna put the tabletop tarot against the cozy witch and see who wins. I already know who's gonna win, but we're gonna do it anyway. Because the rest of these I'm unsure about. And this is the little deck contender, the little this or that started this whole idea for me. So I figured we'd just start with them. So I'm gonna talk about each deck briefly, and then we'll just kind of do a side-by-side flip through as I kind of think about whether or not I want to keep them, whether or not I feel like they do sit in the same space. So over here on the right, we have the tabletop tarot, love the backs. On the left, we have the Cozy Witch Tarot. Also love the backs of it. Like also tactile aesthetics, all of that's gonna come into play, right? Because that is an important part of my practice. We're gonna talk about the tabletop really quick because like, I'm just gonna be honest, this deck is not going anywhere. This is one of my absolute favorite decks. As I've mentioned a million times before, if you've read the book Legends and Lattes, this to me is Legends and Lattes in deck form. It is so cozy. It is my go-to comfort deck. There are so many references in this deck that are familiar to me. It is based in a D&D world. It's inspired by some sort of pop culture D&D stuff. I see people that I recognize, characters that I recognize in here, and just even, you know, situations that I recognize. It's like all the things I love, right? Tactilely speaking, I way more prefer the tabletop tarot. It's smaller, it's easier for me to work with. This is kind of big and chunky. It's difficult for me to kind of get my hands around. And like, I'll be honest, even though the images are really super cute, the messages are cute, this deck feels very young to me, and it doesn't really feel like it exists in a space that feels super comfortable for me. So when I'm looking at a warm, cozy hug deck, this one is great, but this one more fits, I think, in alignment with what is comfy and cozy to me. But in all fairness, let's just go ahead and flip through them both together so you can see a few cards from each. I like, y'all, this 10 of Cups, like I just, like, this is the thing with this deck, right? So many associations for me just immediately pop. And when I'm looking over here at this Queen of Swords, like, it's great, it's nice. Granted, I'm comparing Queen of Swords to 10 of Cups. Fair comparison, probably not. But just in looking at like the images, the minute this card hits the table, like there's a warm, fuzzy feeling for me. There is a personal association. This, I'm like, it's cute. I don't feel anything from it though. This, oh my goodness, again, total feelings with this. This, not so much. Like it's great. And I want to be really, really clear that the whole point of this video is to not diss on the decks that I am like not sure that I'm gonna keep or want. Obviously, I purchased them for a reason. I liked them. I still like them in most cases. I just find that I have something else that maybe sits more in alignment in that space for me. So that's where we're at. Definitely not knocking any of these decks. The Cozy Witch is amazing. I also don't identify as a witch anymore. I like more identify as a D&D nerd. So like this is more me, right? This is not. And I think that's the thing. It's really interesting. This was me in my very early 20s. This was me trying to be Cozy Witch in my early 20s. This is me now. And so as far as being like a comfort deck, as far as being something cozy and warm and nurturing and loving, while the Cozy Witch has all of those vibes for me, it's not me now. It's not me anymore. And I had thought about keeping it as a way to kind of tap into that sort of 20-year-old cozy witch me. But like, I'll be honest, cozy witch was not a term that I would have used in my 20s. It was more gothy, you know, grungy, anti-everything kind of witch aesthetic, right? Not this cozy witch. I love that the cozy witch is a thing now. It just wasn't a thing back when I was that age. And so it kind of like misses the mark for me in terms of being a deck that I think really works for me right now. This, however, is like everything I absolutely love all rolled into one, where I'm at right now in my life. So definitely think the tabletop for me is going to be where it's at. That's the one I'm going to keep. And I'm pretty sure that I'm going to rehome my cozy witch, because as cute as this deck is, it just doesn't fit where I am right now in terms of what I need for a comfort deck. All right, so that was the easy one. We started with the easy one because that was the one that like started this whole idea, but also it's the one that like I already knew going in. Like the tabletop's not going anywhere. It's never left my desk, not since I've gotten it. So like it's the most used deck in my collection probably. I knew it wasn't going anywhere. So let's go into some decks that I'm like, I really am not sure how this is all gonna come about. So these two decks that I've kind of paired against each other are the Sacred Sisterhood Tarot and the Tarot of the Strange Branches or Antlers. I can never remember which one it is. I'm really unsure where this one's gonna go. So this one is the Sacred Sisters Tarot. I have edged mine in yellow. I've edged both of these decks. I really like this deck. I love the black and the kind of brown tan. I love the muted colors. Like aesthetically, this is my jam. It's also a very RWS inspired deck, but it does go its own way in a few places, and I do really enjoy that. It's got a lot of diversity in it. The cardstock is great. These are both mass market decks. I think this is mass market. I know this is. I think that these Strange Branches or Antlers or whatever is mass market. I have edged this one as well. Okay, so tactile. This deck I can actually use shuffle and it works great. It's got a great just kind of standard satiny cardstock that's thin and flexible. It does have a bit of a bow, so you can see it's rocking. I think this one does too. I'm pretty sure that all of my decks have bows, and I think that's just because I live in the Pacific Northwest and it's quite damp here. This Tarot of the Strange Branches Antlers, what did we call it? Strange Branchlers, I think. It's like the shortcut we created. This deck is really beautiful. I really love the artwork, but it is all in French. So that's kind of a, I mean, I know what the cards are, but like that's easy to tell. That's the Ten of Pentacles, Seven of Wands, Three of Wands. Like I can read it just fine, but I cannot read the guidebook. Whereas I can read the guidebook for the Sacred Sisterhood. Do I? No. So should I even be talking about guidebooks? Probably not. Here's the thing. I think part of it, the problem with this deck is it's the cardstock. Like it's very matte and thick, and like it's a chunk. Like I can't even, it's like, look how much bigger it is. I can't even get my hands around it to work with it. I think that tactilely, like the Sacred Sisterhood is gonna win that competition because I can't actually comfortably work with this deck. I do enjoy it, but I honestly don't pull it out that often. And like, I'll be honest, I don't pull out the Sacred Sisterhood that often either. So now as I'm flipping through both of these decks, I'm looking at them going, do I need either one? Do I need either one? What do they add to my practice? What do they add to my collection? I'm trying to think about what that is. The Sacred Sisterhood is very diverse. I really do like that. They're definitely both kind of feminine focused decks. This one has a very sort of soft, supportive, beautiful kind of energy to it. This one feels, the Sacred Sisterhood feels a little bit more like into the mundane in the real world. But like, I'll be honest, I like really don't know that I need either. I'm trying to think, where do I use these? How do I put these into practice for myself? And I really don't. I really don't. They've both been in kind of just sitting in a box, different boxes, but they've both been sitting in a box. And I'm like, maybe I don't need either one. Okay, so next we have two mass market decks that do kind of feel like they sit in a very similar space for me. Over here, I have the, what is this? I love when I can't remember the names of decks. It'll come to me. It'll come to me. I can't remember the name of this one either. And this is, I think this is the Mystic Dreamer Tarot. We'll just take a look at the backs. I have edged both of these decks, which I'll show you here in a minute. Dreamkeeper's Tarot. Dreamkeeper's Tarot. This deck was indie. It went mass market, so both of these are currently mass market decks. And here's the thing with these two decks. Okay, so the Dreamkeepers, this deck and I had a whole thing. I had a rage moment with the cardstock in this deck, and I like beat the heck out of it, and now it's like all soft and wonderful, and I love it. I love the imagery in this deck. It's very dark and moody. The art is absolutely beautiful. It's digital art, collaged, gorgeous. I love the interpretations, and the guidebook is really, really good. Guidebooks for both of these decks are actually really good, but the Dreamkeepers is one that I've used quite a bit over the years. I've done full like deck study on it. So the Mystic Dreamer is one. Here's the edging I did on it. The Mystic Dreamer it's old school digital collage, and like this is one of those that I just like, it's kind of a nostalgia thing, I think, for me. I really like this deck, but honestly, again, we're like, it sits in the same space, right? The guidebook is wonderful. I really, really enjoy the guidebook, but let's do a little head-to-head here. Let's just flip through some cards. I guess when we're looking at, let's talk about tactile. I would say that the Mystic Dreamer would win tactilely because I like Llewellyn cardstock way better than I like US Games cardstock, although their linen stuff is great. If like everybody could switch to that linen that's like actually usable and like a real playing card deck, that would be amazing, but that is not what this is on. Although this I have, like, I'm not even gonna tell you what all I did to this deck because it's terrible. Like I broke down all the fibers in this deck pretty much and edged it, and now it's all like soft and wonderful and like it feels great in the hand, but I had to put a lot of effort into it. So it's probably not gonna go anywhere just for that alone. And this is probably not a super fair comparison because now I kind of like, I have a personal attachment to this deck and I'm bonded to this deck. But that is a consideration, right? If I have two decks that sit in the same space and I'm more bonded and more sentimentally attached to one, why would I choose the other one over it, right? As much as I like the Mystic Dreamer Tarot, I do really feel like the Dream Keepers sits more in alignment, but hopefully you can see like aesthetically, they kind of have a similar vibe to it. It's a little bit harder to tell because of the borders on the Mystic Dreamer. Would I like it better if it didn't have borders? Possibly. And it's one that I really do enjoy working with, but I do find again that it sits in the very similar space to the Dreamkeepers, and I'm probably almost always going to pull my Dreamkeepers out instead. I really like the interpretations, the way the art is depicted on the Dreamkeepers. It is RWS, but it kind of sits a little outside in some places, and I really appreciate that. I'm thinking this one because like honestly, I'm attached to it. I'm bonded to it. We're friends. We made friends. We did not get off on a great foot. I had the indie. I loved the indie deck, but there were a few changes in terms of the art that I actually preferred in the mass market, and so that's why I rehummed my indie and kept the mass market. But I like the cardstock and me, we had a whole thing. I had a fit about it. I fixed it. It just took some work, and now I love it. Like I'm really attached to it. I don't really have that same sort of sentimental attachment to the Mystic Dreamer. Like it's beautiful and I enjoy working with it, and it's really cool with that that old school oracle that was like the enchanted map, but then I got the new version of that and it doesn't have the mappy border. So now like this doesn't even have like a oracle to pair with it. So I think this one, maybe it's just time for it to move on, to go find a new home, even though it's really cool, because I'm always gonna, I think, prefer my Dreamkeepers over it. So the next two decks that I have are both mass market decks. This is the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot, and then in this bag you might recognize I have my Dreaming Way Tarot. So the reason I pulled these two out, I do have another deck. So we know the Dreaming Way is not going anywhere, right? Like it's a favorite. It's one of my most used decks. It sits on my desk. It's not leaving my collection. But I wanted to compare it to the Pavlov Tarot because of the way that I feel like these two decks, that I would use them in my collection. So I thought I would compare them in that way, but then I have another deck that I'm going to compare in more of an aesthetic way to the Pavlov Tarot. Let's just Dreaming Way, right? Like we know I love the Dreaming Way. It's my most used deck. I keep saying that about these decks, right? For a general reader, this is my most used deck. For a comfort reader and like all kinds of other things, it's my tabletop. But I love this deck. It has a totally different energy though, and look aesthetically to the Fyodor Pavlov. So cardstock wise, like this is that beautiful new linen. I do not like the shiny gilding. Like we know how I feel about gilding. I don't like it. I mean, it's nice gilding, but like I don't like metallic gilding in general. So it's got that going for it, or not going for it as the case may be. Definitely different aesthetics here going on. But see, here's the thing with this one is I feel like this is also a deck very similar to the Dreaming Way that I could use for absolutely everything. It's got a great aesthetic. I love the colors, like the minimalist color palette. This one, maybe it could even put up against the Sacred Sisterhood, but I feel like they sit in different spaces. This feels more balanced to me than that one does. I'll be honest, I really haven't used the Fyodor Pavlov, so it's not a terrible fair comparison, but the fact that I haven't used it, because I'm always like, well, if I need a general reader, I'm gonna go for my Dreaming Way, right? Or if I want this vibe, this energy, this look, there's another deck that I would go to, which we'll take a look at here in a minute. The Fyodor Pavlov does have much more diversity than the Dreaming Way does. It's a newer deck, and it's definitely got that going for it. They both kind of have a little bit of a muted color palette. There is more color in the Dreaming Way, and I feel like it sits more in the space of like that kind of fantasy world that I love. This definitely feels like fantasy world, but not in the same way. But as far as being like just general readers, I feel like these are both general readers. I don't know, this feels more like storybook. And now that I'm looking at it, like maybe it would even be a better comparison against like something like the Arthur Rackham Tarot or the John Bauer. But again, those sit in a different space. So like trying to find, and maybe that's a thing, I'm trying to find a deck to like compare it against, and I'm having trouble, so that says something. But also the fact that I've had this deck for over a year now, whenever it first came out, and I haven't used it. Like I've played with it a little bit, but I have not actually brought it into practice and used it. That's like telling for me. Let's actually pair it with the deck that I feel like sits more in alignment aesthetically. And this is my Pagan Other Worlds. I feel like aesthetically, these more have a similar energy. I don't know if it's the like muted, more limited color palette. Ooh, look, we've got our aces. Like, let's compare. That's perfect. I really like the coloration more on the Pagan Otherworlds. Like, this is really cool. I like this very minimalistic color palette, but it also makes it hard for me to pair it because I feel like it really limits what I can work with it in my collection. Like, it has a very unique style, which is really cool, but I don't know how usable it is for me. And again, they kind of both feel like they sit in these sort of fantasy storybook worlds. I mean, are we doing fair comparisons? No, probably not. I've used the Pagan Otherworlds a lot. I've barely used the Pavlov Tarot. But again, that's telling. I have not used it. So therefore, that's telling me something. And I think as beautiful as it is, and as much as I really like the aesthetic of it, I feel like if I want this sort of muted color palette, this sort of aesthetic, I would go to my Pagan Otherworlds. If I want this going into this sort of fantasy storybook world, like kind of get that sense out of this card, like I would go more to my Rackham or my John Bauer or some of my other more fairy tale-esque inspired decks. I feel like it's not fairy tale enough to sit in that space for me. It's not a fairy tale deck. This is me layering my own interpretations and my own practice over the top of it. But it feels like it's fairy tale adjacent, but not enough to sit in that space for me. It doesn't feel like one that I would use that often for just everyday readings as compared to like my Dreaming Way. Again, we're comparing indie to mass market, not exactly a fair comparison, although the production value on the Fyodor Pavlov is, I think, indie quality. Like they really went above and beyond. The cardstock is lovely. It's beautiful. The artwork is stunning. Again, most people like the gilding. I don't like it. The backs are beautiful with the stamping on the back. It's got a gorgeous hardback book, which is amazing. I don't even have the book for the Pagan Otherworlds. So like production wise, I do feel like you know, especially for the money, like this is where it's at, because this comes with so much more for the money and the production quality is beautiful. This just fits more in alignment with my practice and the way that I work with my decks. So I think it's just time for the Fyodor Pavlov to go. So for this one, we have another sort of 3 decks that really probably aren't the same, but they feel like maybe they sit in the same space for me. And the one that I'm kind of considering whether or not is going to stay is the Goddess of Love Tarot. This is a mass market deck. I'm going to kind of look at that in comparison to the Rosebud Tarot. This is the indie version, but this deck is available mass market now, and the Lioness Oracle Tarot. And I'll talk about why I'm comparing each of those as we go through them. So on this side, I have the Rosebud Tarot, and over here I have the Goddess of Love Tarot. Let's talk about the Rosebud really quick. I love this deck. It is vintage photos. And the reason I pulled this one out is because it is photo collage, and there are quite a few roses that feature in this deck, and you'll see that that's a motif that happens throughout all 3 of these decks. And so I thought it was just an interesting one. It's got like, it's created in a similar way, in a similar style. This is the Goddess of Love Tarot. Now this is more focused on like goddesses, and I'm thinking that even the Night Botanical one might have been a more fair comparison in terms of like, this is a goddess deck and that one's a goddess deck, but I don't really read this like a goddess deck. I have worked with this one some. I do like that it's pippy. It's, again, photo collage. I have a lot of photo collage decks now, and so I'm starting to get really picky about the ones that I hang on to. Tactilely wise, I do not like this deck. Like, the cardstock is really thin. I don't like the backs. I'm not a fan of the red borders. I've gone back and forth about, do I like them? Do I not like them? Maybe I want to take them off. Maybe I don't. And like, that's just a lot of energy invested in a stack of cards, right? When I have other decks that I'm like, oh, I love everything about this deck. I love the cardstock and I love the way it shuffles and I love the borders and like all of that. Tactilely, the Goddess of Love is a huge miss. Like the production quality of it is really bad in my opinion. I feel like they put more effort into the book and the packaging in the box than they did in the cards, and that's really disappointing because the cards are the thing that I use, right? That's the thing I'm buying it for. I'm not buying it for the book and I'm not buying it for the box. I'm buying it for the cards, and for that to be the weakest link in the whole product is a little bit concerning. I do really like the collage work in it. I feel like the red borders, like I go back and forth, but honestly, I feel like the red borders are really distracting. There's so much going on. There's all the white lines. And it just, I don't think it's a deck that I really enjoy seeing on my table, whereas the Rosebud Tarot, which is also digital collage, which also is a little bit pippy in some places, it definitely has more of that aesthetic vibe that resonates with me. It's cleaner, it feels more intentional, and like in terms of like how, and I'm not talking about the art that the creator created, I'm talking about the production quality, which is the publisher's thing. I feel like I'm getting more visually out of this deck than I am this. And again, this one, you know, says it's a goddess deck, talking about goddess and love and roses, and I think it connects to like, yeah, it says a book and deck for embodying the erotic divine feminine. I don't really get that energy when I work with it. Maybe some others do, but that's not really coming through for me. I have other goddess decks that work more in alignment with that energy for me than this one does in particular. So let's compare it to one of my most used collage tarot decks. This is the Lioness Tarot Oracle, beautiful matte gilding. Like if you're gonna do gilding, matte, do it matte. Do it matte or don't do it at all. That's my opinion. Nobody asked. Okay, I'm gonna split that down because that's quite large. So this, again, very heavy into the roses. It's again collage, photo manipulation. Again, we're talking about decks that I'm personally attached to versus decks that I really don't have any sort of connection to at this point. And even as I've been working with it, I haven't really built much of a personal connection with it as I have with some of these others. So again, we're looking at, if I'm going to compare collage deck to collage deck, decks that both feel like they embody divine feminine for me, because the Lioness Oracle Tarot, even though it doesn't necessarily, that's not what it claims to represent. I definitely feel it coming through the deck, and it just speaks to me more than the Goddess of Love does. Again, mass market, indie, like that's a whole thing. I think that if you don't have a collage deck and this artwork appeals to you, I think it's great. If I discount all the borders and everything, I really do like the collage work. If I could look past all the other stuff going on the card, I really do like the collage work. And again, this is why I've like, maybe I should just trim it. I could trim all of the, basically everything but the title down at the bottom off, and I could use it that way. But again, we're looking at, do I need to when I have this? When I have this deck that sits in a similar space, I have others that tap into that divine feminine energy more so than I feel like this one does. And so we're circling back around to the this or that. Do I need this because I have this, right? If I'm gonna pull a deck and I'm like, I want divine feminine, I want a photo collage, I want roses, I'm always gonna go to the Lioness Oracle Tarot. I've had it longer, I'm bonded with it. Is it a fair comparison? Probably not, but this is me just being honest and working through my own collection and looking at, I have lots of things that overlap, and do I want to keep those overlapping things or not? And I think this is the case where I think the Goddess of Love is just, it's just not quite for me. I'll be honest, like if the cardstock was better, if there wasn't so much going on in the border, if it was a little bit cleaner, if they had put a little bit more thought and like money, honestly, like if they'd put a little bit more effort into the production value of the cards and focus less on the packaging in the book, I might be more tempted to keep it. So last in this little declutter, this first round of declutter this or that, we have a couple of Oracle decks here that I want to kind of take a look at and see if I want to keep the Magical Botanical Oracle, because this is the one that I'm considering whether or not I need it. And I've got a couple of decks that I'm going to compare it to. So looking at the backs, we have Botanical Inspirations over here. This is an older deck and it has the name across the back. It's not great. This back is beautiful. They're similar size, similar sort of cardstock. This one's a little bit thinner, a little bit more, I think a little bit more flexible. The Botanical Inspirations is a deck that I've had like forever in my collection. I've used it a lot. I have edged it. It's really hard to tell, but it's like edged in a papery, old paper kind of thing. I absolutely love the messages. I love the aesthetic of this deck, which is the single plant on the parchment paper. We have the name of the plant. We have a very succinct keyword or key phrase, and then there's a quote at the bottom. I really love the setup on this deck. It's very user-friendly. It means that I can throw it into any reading and it works beautifully, and I don't have to struggle with what the deck is trying to tell me or what the message is. Also, like, I love the messages in the guidebook. They're really short and sweet and they're perfect. The Magical Botanical Oracle, I'll be honest, I got simply because the book is written by Christopher Panczak, and that's an author that I've followed for, I don't know, 20 plus years. And that's the only reason I wanted to read the guidebook. It was beautiful. I read it and now I'm like done with it. The art is really beautiful on this deck, but like I can't read half of what's on the cards. I don't like that a couple of the cards are dark. They feel really out of place. And I get that like there's a point to that, but it feels really out of place when they come up in a reading. I don't really know what to do with a lot of the stuff that's on the cards, and I have to get into the guidebook. I'm very reliant on it. It's not near of an easy reader as this one is. They're both botanical decks, and they both, while this one doesn't necessarily call itself a magical deck, we'll look at one that does here in a minute, or kind of magical. It's definitely botanical, but I feel like there's that essence of sort of magic beneath it. As far as being like usable decks, I just feel like the Botanical Inspirations is a much more user-friendly deck. I struggle to read the font on this deck. I don't know what these things are. There's no clear keyword or key phrase, so I definitely have to get into the guidebook. Aesthetically, this is beautiful. It's beautiful, and it does pair really well with a lot of things that I have in my collection, but I could just as easily use this deck in terms of like aesthetics and pairing and pulling in that kind of vintagey botanical energy. They swap out seamlessly in terms of that on the table, but I really can't work with this one. I've tried many times. It requires a lot more effort than I'm willing to put into an Oracle deck. And I've said it before, and there are some Oracle decks that I'm willing to put that time and effort in, but these types of decks that I buy them to be supplements to my tarot readings. I do not buy them to be decks that exist kind of in their own space and in their own work. They are bought primarily to support my tarot practice. And so with that being the intention, they really need to serve that purpose. And this one is not currently, it's more of a hindrance in a reading. It takes me out of the reading because I have to get into the book. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with that one. So we're going to compare it to the Herbal Astrology Oracle. So here's the backs of this one. I have not edged these ones yet. That's really tall, so we're going to break it down. So in terms of being like herbal, magic-y, I mean, this one has an astrology focus. So like apples and oranges a little bit, but they're both very much sort of magically leaning. They're both herbal. And I feel like, again, I'm getting so much more out of what's going on in the herbal astrology. I'm getting more out of the artwork. This feels more like art. This feels more like an oracle, and that's fine. I don't mind art decks. I have some decks that I have specifically just for the art, but again, that was not the intention for this deck. The intention for this deck was to use it as a support to tarot, and it's not really functioning in that way for me. I feel like I get much more out of the art here in the herbal astrology deck. Also, we've got a keyword, and like that's really kind of the linchpin for me when it comes to Oracle. If it doesn't have a keyword on it, it better have a really good reason for not having a keyword on it, because then I absolutely have to get into a guidebook in order to get anything out it most of the time. So it better have a good reason, and I don't feel like this one does. I feel like this one would have benefited from a keyword. Again, that's the difference between these two decks for me, is this one, you know, definitely they both function in that sort of magical botanical space, but this one's much more usable. I like the artwork in it. I feel like I get more out of the artwork, like even just looking at these two together, even though they're different plants, totally different energies, right? I don't know what to do with this art. I don't know what to do with this as a message. This, I see the broken mask here. I see the scorpion. I see the flowers. I see the little hourglasses. This doesn't give me near as much to work with. I don't know what to do with this art. And I think that's part of where it comes down to. Same here. Like I see a flower. I see the flowers, but there's also so much going on in the background that I just really can't pick out. And it's not clear. It's not a clear reader in that sense. And again, it's one that would be beautiful, I think, for magical practice. If I did magic, if I actually worked with cards in a magical spell casting sense, I think this would be great for that. I do not do that anymore. And so I feel like that's missing the mark for me. I feel like this would benefit from being in a collection of somebody who does work with cards in that way. But for me, it's just a hard reader in terms of, I just really don't know what to do with the artwork. It doesn't have the keyword and all of that. So that's gonna wrap us up for this first installment, or what I'm pretty sure is going to be the first installment of my little deck declutter. I think for the most part, I think everything that I was unsure about and I was like, I think I have something that fits this bill, I think all of those are going to be ending up in purgatory, because I feel like throughout this process, I've really honed into why it was that I was unsure about them in the first place. And that's great. That's one of the benefits of creating videos like this. I get to work through my own process. I get to share it with you. Hopefully it's beneficial. Again, I'm not dissing any of these decks that I talked about today. They're all beautiful decks. I purchased them all for a reason. I brought them into my collection for a reason. They just maybe necessarily don't fit that purpose anymore, or I have other things that sit in that space better. So that's it for me today. As always, I'll leave links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for joining me for this little deck declutter, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.